Tonight's gospel reading comes from the book of Galatians, chapter 3, verses 15 through 27. My friends, I will use an everyday example to explain what I mean. Once someone agrees to something, no one else can change or cancel the agreement. That is how it is with the promises God made to Abraham and his descendants. The promises were not made to many descendants, but only to one, and that one is Christ. What I am saying is that the law cannot change or cancel God's promise that was made 430 years before the law was given. If we have to obey the law in order to receive God's blessings, those blessings don't really come to us because of God's promise. But God was kind to Abraham and made him a promise. What is the use of the law? It was given later to show that we sin. But it was only supposed to last until the coming of that descendant who was given in the promise. In fact, angels gave the law to Moses, who gave it to the people. There is only one God, and the law did not come directly from him. Does the law disagree with God's promises? No, it doesn't. If any law could give life to us, we could become acceptable to God by obeying that law. But the scriptures say that sin controls everyone, so that God's promises will be for anyone who has faith in Jesus Christ. The law controlled us and kept us under its power until that time came when we would have faith. In fact, the law was our teacher. It was supposed to teach us until we had faith and were acceptable to God. But once a person has learned to have faith, there is no more need to have the law as a teacher. All of you are God's children because of your faith in Christ Jesus. And when you were baptized, it was as though you had put on Christ in the same way you put on your new clothes. Well, when it was decided I would give tonight's sermon on our freedom to fail, we joked that if things fell off the rails and this turns into a complete dud, I would still be a success because God actually expects us to fail. Ironically, that stresses me out. It really does. But, but he really does expect us to fail, which is why he gives us rules. Now that brings me comfort. I'm sure it comes to no surprise to many of you that I like rules. I am a rule follower by nature. So much so, I actually pulled myself over one time after running a red light. Seriously, I was living in Springfield, and my friend Stephanie and I were on our way to hang out with some more friends, and there was a traffic light just to the south of my apartment complex. Well, traffic was clear, I made the left-hand turn, and off we were, when all of a sudden I realized what I did. Being in the curb lane, I just coasted to a stop when Stephanie was like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh my gosh, I just ran that red light." She said, "I know you did, but no one caught you. You don't need to pull yourself over and wait for someone to come give you a ticket. You just keep going." And so, we kind of laughed about it, but I thought, she's right. You just keep going. Now back to Paul. He's writing to the Galatians, and he's really pretty critical of them. He's called them foolish or stupid in response to their ways. We learned a few weeks ago that they were still living in this yes but society, and they were veering away from the Christian gospel. He's trying to remind them that God's promise to Abraham predates the 10 Commandments and any other laws or stipulations that they're trying to hold themselves and one another to. Now, we first learn of that promise in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. It says, God laid out promises to Abraham as long as he followed his command, saying, "Leave your country, your family, your relatives, and go to the land I will show you. I will bless you and make your descendants into a great nation. You will become famous and be a blessing to others. I will bless anyone who blesses you, but I will put a curse on anyone who puts a curse on you. Everyone on earth will be blessed because of you." It goes on to say in Genesis 12, verse 7, "But the Lord appeared to Abram and promised, 'I will give this land to your family forever.' Abram then built an altar for the Lord." While the version I just read says family, other translations use the word descendant or seed in the singular sense. So Paul's trying to make it unequivocally clear that the laws created more than 400 years after this contract was made between God and Abram cannot and will never supersede it. Furthermore, he's giving the Galatians a grammar lesson on singular versus plural nouns. Descendant, singular. And it's not just any descendant, it's the descendant. It's Jesus. It seems right here that he's kind of like a parent talking to his kids, saying, how many times do I have to tell you? How many times do I have to tell you that Jesus is the way, the truth, the life? Now, Paul calms down a bit, and he clarifies that he's not saying that the law is unnecessary, because in fact it really is necessary, but people are putting too much emphasis on it and their works and how it's related to the law, rather than their faith in Christ. Well, I'm going to be completely honest. I like the New Testament way more than I like the Old Testament. The Old Testament is full of plagues. It has a little too much chaotic behavior for me. If I would have been there, I would have just been sitting over in the corner, a complete nervous wreck, just waiting for people to get in trouble. And of course they did, and on quite a grand scale at times, which is why God knew we needed rules. We were a sinful people and needed guidance and structure to learn right from wrong. So something had to be done while we waited for his promise to be fulfilled. Paul likened the law to a teacher, which obviously was pretty relatable to me. Well, in researching the law, I learned that it may be referring to the first 5 books of the Bible, which make up the Torah. It could be related, or it could be referring to every decree set forth in the entire Old Testament, or the 10 Commandments. However, based on the timeline that Paul's given here, we can infer that in this instance, he's referring to the commandments. Just 10 rules, a relatively pared down list of instructions to guide one's decision-making and actions, teaching society right from wrong. As a teacher, I want to make sure my students know right from wrong so they can make good choices, they can do the right thing, even when no one is watching. We can't have the assumption that children will innately know what to do. That's why we have school handbooks, classroom rules. It's also why about 10 years ago, I found myself having a conversation with a 5-year-old about why we don't moon people, especially at school. I can still remember his face when he earnestly looked at me and said, "Oh, I didn't know that was a rule." I said, well, even though it's not written down, it is a rule. And I then kind of filed that incident as yet another thing that college did not prepare me for, because we certainly did not go over that in any class. But while I didn't add "thou shalt not moon" to my set of classroom rules, I still think about that day often when I'm addressing behavior in the classroom. All but the first 3 years of my teaching experience have been in special education, so I tend to look at behavior a little differently than non-educators and even other educators who teach in the general ed setting. When laying out expectations for my students, I like to do so in a more positive manner. I want them to know what I do want them to be doing and what I do expect from them, not necessarily what I don't. So instead of saying, "No running," I tell my students, "Use walking feet." I recently attended a multi-day training on addressing challenging behaviors, and that really solidified that thought even more. The trainer was going over some things that I had really had some familiarity with, but she used a slightly different word choice. She called them "as soon as" statements. So an example might be for a parent. Instead of telling your child, "You cannot have dessert until you eat your broccoli," maybe they would say, "As soon as you eat your broccoli, you can have dessert." It might sound crazy, but that little change in how it's presented can be a total game changer in dealing with problematic behaviors. Now, parents know and teachers know bad behavior is still going to happen, but we learn from it, we keep going, and we try again. Paul's letter to the Galatians reminds me of the ultimate "as soon as" statement. Our adherence to the rules doesn't punch our ticket to salvation. Likewise, when we slip up, it's not game over. He said, "But once a person has learned to have faith, there is no more need to have the law as a teacher. All of you are God's children because of your faith in Christ Jesus." As humans, we are, and we will always be controlled by sin. But God gives us that freedom to fail because he gave us his only son. So as soon as we put our faith in Jesus, we receive God's promise, regardless of how often